It was another bustling morning in the heart of the city. The busy metropolitan street hummed with the energy of people rushing to work, the sound of cars honking, and the rhythmic clinking of coins as street vendors called out to pedestrians, hoping to make a sale. Bright billboards flashed advertisements, neon signs bathed the streets in colorful light, and the city's pulse never seemed to slow. Yet, amidst the hustle and bustle, 13-year-old Malik sat quietly by the sidewalk, invisible to most. Malik wasn't in a suit, nor did he carry a briefcase. He wore a worn-out hoodie and ragged jeans, his small frame hunched over as he clutched a small bag of food he had managed to collect from leftover scraps. His fingers trembled slightly, not from hunger, but from the cold that seemed to always linger. He had learned how to survive on the streets, doing odd jobs here and there, keeping his head down, and avoiding trouble whenever possible. The people around him paid no attention to his existence, except for the occasional judgmental glance. He knew better than to make eye contact, for that would only lead to more rejection. He was used to the stares, those looks that saw a homeless black boy, not a human being, not someone worthy of kindness. The society he lived in had no room for kids like him. The world felt too big, too indifferent to care, but Malik didn't have the luxury of hope. He simply needed to get by day. As the crowd bustled around him, a businessman in a crisp suit, walking with a sense of purpose, brushed past Malik. Without looking down, the man shoved Malik aside, muttering under his breath, "These street kids," always in the way. His words were a sharp sting, but Malik didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that people like him weren't meant to be seen, especially not by the ones who had power and privilege. Malik's shoulders slumped slightly, but he remained where he was, waiting for the moment when he would have to leave his spot. His thoughts wandered, but his eyes never strayed from the ground. He couldn't afford to let the harsh reality of the world weigh on him too much. Life had never been kind to him, but he had learned to navigate its cruelty with silence and stealth. And so, like most days, he sat quietly, watching the world rush by without a second thought. But today, fate had something different in mind. Agent Olivia Carter, the chief of the FBI, had just stepped out of a cafe after a successful meeting. As one of the most respected figures in law enforcement, she exuded confidence and professionalism. Dressed in her sharp FBI uniform, she moved through the streets like someone who had earned her place in the world, someone who commanded respect. People in the area, busy with their day-to-day activities, took notice of her every move, but most kept their distance. After all, she was a high-profile figure, someone who had carved out a reputation as a leader in the intelligence community. She had just grabbed a quick lunch, a sandwich she had been looking forward to after a long morning of meetings. Olivia took a bite, savoring the taste, but in an instant, everything changed. A sudden, violent cough caught in her throat. She tried to clear it, but nothing came. She gasped for air, clutching her throat, panic rising in her chest as she realized she couldn't breathe. Her face flushed, and her body began to tremble. The sharp, desperate feeling of suffocation began to set in as she staggered backward, struggling to stay on her feet. Her eyes scanned the crowd, her mouth opening and closing, trying to scream for help. But no sound came out. People around her stopped, noticing the commotion, but rather than rushing to her side, most just stood frozen, staring. A few whispered to each other, "Is she okay?" But no one moved. Some people even looked away, assuming that someone like her, an FBI agent, could handle the situation on her own. "She's FBI. She'll be fine," someone muttered dismissively, almost as if her status alone could somehow save her. Time seemed to stretch on forever as Olivia's panic grew. She felt the world around her blur, her vision narrowing, the crowd's cold indifference making everything worse. For a moment, it seemed like no one cared, no one was willing to step forward and help. But as her struggle continued, a figure in the crowd noticed her, and without hesitation, he acted. Malik, sitting on the sidewalk nearby, had been watching the scene unfold. His heart began to race as he saw the woman gasping for air, her face growing red with each passing second. He didn't think twice. Instinct kicked in. Malik had seen something like this before, a brief mention of it during a lesson at a homeless shelter he occasionally visited. A volunteer had taught the basics of the Heimlich maneuver, explaining how to help someone who was choking. It had always seemed like a distant idea to Malik, something that might never come up in his life. But now, seeing Olivia on the verge of collapse, he knew exactly what to do. He jumped to his feet, pushing through the crowd, shouting to get people's attention. "Move out of the way," he called, his voice full of urgency. The crowd parted reluctantly, eyes still full of hesitation and disbelief, but Malik didn't stop. He reached Olivia just in time, seeing the panic in her eyes. Malik didn't waste a second. He positioned himself behind her, his hands moving quickly as he remembered the steps from the shelter. With steady focus, he performed the Heimlich maneuver, his small frame doing everything he could to help her. The force of his actions finally dislodged the obstruction in Olivia's throat. She gasped for air, her body trembling as the rush of oxygen filled her lungs. Olivia's breathing slowly steadied as she stood there, shocked and grateful. Her eyes locked on Malik's, searching his face in confusion and disbelief. She didn't know who this young boy was or why he had risked everything to save her, but she was deeply thankful. The crowd, now aware of what had just transpired, began to murmur. Some were still in shock, others were apologizing for their hesitation. But Malik had already moved out of the way, silently stepping back into the crowd, his actions already forgotten by most. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as Malik rushed to Olivia's side. He could see the panic in her eyes, her body shaking violently, her hands clutching at her throat. Every second counted, and Malik's heart pounded as he positioned himself behind her. He had no time to second-guess himself. He'd seen the Heimlich maneuver performed before, but this was real. This was life or death. With a deep breath, Malik wrapped his small arms around Olivia's waist, struggling against her weight, but determined to do what he had to. His hands, shaking but firm, pressed into her abdomen. He thrust upward, applying all the strength he could muster, hoping to dislodge whatever was blocking her airway. The crowd around them gasped in shock, watching in disbelief. Here was a homeless black boy, probably younger than most of them, performing a life-saving maneuver on a high-profile FBI agent. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on some of the onlookers, who couldn't help but pull out their phones, capturing the moment. "What's going on? Is he saving her?" one voice whispered. "A street kid helping the FBI chief?" Malik didn't hear the whispers, didn't care. His focus was entirely on Olivia, her life in his hands. He continued the motions, pushing harder with each attempt, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he worked to get her air again. Then, on the third attempt, it happened. The piece of food lodged in Olivia's throat was dislodged with a forceful pop. She gasped violently for air, her chest rising and falling in frantic breaths. The relief was immediate, but so was the exhaustion. She stumbled backward, collapsing onto the pavement in a heap, her hands still clutching her throat as she fought to regain her breath. The crowd stood frozen, their cameras forgotten for a moment, the shock of the scene settling over them like a blanket. Olivia was alive, but she had barely escaped disaster. She was alive because of this young boy, this boy who just moments ago had been invisible to everyone around him. Now he was a hero. For a moment, there was complete silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone waited, expecting something. Perhaps they thought Olivia would push Malik away, dismiss him like so many had dismissed people like him before. Perhaps they expected her to be embarrassed or angry. But what happened next left them all stunned. Olivia, still struggling to catch her breath, looked down at Malik. She was on her knees in front of him, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she reached out a hand, her grip firm but gentle. She pulled him into an embrace, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. The crowd, who'd been silent up until that moment, let out a collective breath. People were still processing what had just occurred, what it meant to see someone like Malik, someone they had dismissed or ignored, now saving the life of one of the most powerful women in the country. Olivia looked around at the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the onlookers. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way the air had thickened with expectation. The people, who had assumed Malik wasn't worth paying attention to now, had no choice but to witness the truth. As Malik pulled back from the embrace, still dazed and unsure of what was happening, Olivia stood and straightened her jacket. She wiped a tear from her cheek and faced the crowd. "This young man just saved my life," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "and he deserves the respect and attention that everyone else in this crowd has gotten today. Don't let his appearance fool you. What matters is who he is, and who he is a hero." The silence that had gripped the crowd was broken, but this time it was different. The bystanders, once unsure or dismissive, now looked at Malik with a new understanding. The phones that had been recording him now seemed to represent something more, an acknowledgement of the humanity of a boy who had always been invisible to them. Malik looked around, his chest tight with the weight of the moment, unsure of what to say. But Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. "I'm going to make sure people know your name," she said softly, "and they will know you're someone to be respected." As the crowd slowly dispersed, many still whispering in awe of Malik's bravery, Olivia turned to the young boy who had saved her life. She could feel a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for him, but there was something else stirring inside her, something that went beyond this single act of heroism. She knew, even in the aftermath of her rescue, that Malik deserved more than just thanks. He deserved a future. Olivia bent down to Malik's level, her eyes filled with genuine concern. "Malik," she began softly, "I can't thank you enough for what you did. You're a hero." Malik shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, his eyes casting downward, clearly not used to such praise. After a brief silence, Olivia continued, her voice gentle but filled with determination. "But I know there's more to your story. I can see it. What's your life like, Malik? Where do you go when you're not helping people?" Malik hesitated. It was hard to open up about the life he had been forced to lead. He had grown accustomed to survival, hiding his emotions, pushing through each day without showing any vulnerability. But something about Olivia's kindness made him speak. I don't have a home," he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't have a family. I just survive, wherever I can. I take odd jobs, sleep on the street when I can't find somewhere safe. It's been like that for as long as I can remember." Olivia's heart ached for him. The story of his struggle resonated deeply with her. She had seen so many cases of systemic neglect and abuse in her years with the FBI, but something about Malik, his strength, his resilience, struck her differently. This boy had lived a life that most people couldn't imagine, and yet he hadn't given up. He had persevered. "Malik," Olivia said, after a moment of reflection, "I want to help you change your life. You have so much potential. You don't deserve to just survive. You deserve more than that. There's a program I know of, one that helps underprivileged youth like you. They provide education, shelter, and mentorship to kids who need a chance. I want to enroll you in that program. It's your chance to start fresh." Malik's eyes widened in disbelief. He had never imagined something like this could be offered to him. His life had been a constant struggle. But now, here was a woman offering him a chance, a real chance, to build something better. You want to help me?" Malik asked, his voice filled with disbelief but also hope. "But I don't know if I can—" Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a comforting smile. "You already have everything it takes. You've shown me that today. You've got strength, Malik. That's all you need to start." Without another word, Malik stood up and Olivia guided him toward the street. As they walked side by side, the same onlookers who had once judged him, who had assumed he was just another homeless kid, watched in silence. The cameras that had once been pointed at him now seemed to reflect something different. The judgment was gone, replaced with admiration and recognition. Malik, for the first time in a long while, felt seen. Not as a street kid, but as a person with potential. As he walked beside Olivia, a new feeling washed over him, hope. For the first time, he believed that maybe he could change his life. When they reached the end of the street, Malik paused for a moment, looking back at the familiar surroundings of his old life, the cold sidewalks, the places he had once called home. His eyes lingered for a moment, but this time there was no sadness. There was only the quiet realization that today had changed everything. "I'm not going back there," Malik whispered to himself as if making a vow. He turned back to Olivia, his face set with determination. "This is my new beginning.